When a couple gets married and one speaks Spanish and the other French, they will have difficulty communicating. It is the same in marriage. If a husband speaks one love language and the wife another, they will also have difficulty communicating in their marriage. Stay tuned. We'll be right back to break that down for you and tell you what it means.
Hello, and welcome to Living a Godly Marriage. I'm your host, Melvin Greene, and
I'm your co-host, Voncille Greene.
and we want to welcome you to this episode as we start a new series discussing the 5 love languages. And Voncille, we're really looking forward to this.
Yes, we are.
So let's go ahead and get started. Inside every person is an emotional tank that's waiting to be filled with love, which is our greatest need. And we want that tank to be filled by those closest to us, especially our spouse and family.
God designed us to have a relationship with Jesus Christ so he could fill everyone's emotional tank with his love.
Yeah, that's so important. God designed us with that tank. But God also designed marriage for a man and woman to fill each other's emotional tank through companionship and intimacy.
In marriage, we want our spouse to fill our emotional tank so we can feel loved by them.
And that's so important. We want to be loved by our spouse. Well, this is easily met the first 2 years of marriage when a couple is in love. However, when the honeymoon is over and romance turns into marital reality of unresolved conflict, leaks develop in their emotional tanks, which drains the love for their spouse.
Keeping your spouse's emotional tank full of love is as important as keeping the proper amount of oil in a car.
Yes, and if you've ever had a car and haven't had enough oil in it, you know that can cause a problem.
And water.
Being sincere and having good intentions to love your spouse is just not enough in marriage.
Instead, we need to learn how to love our spouse in the way they prefer to be loved, which is called their love language.
And the way they prefer to be loved might be different than mine. Just as a language has different dialects, a love language may have dialects based on culture, geography, or personal history. For example, I was raised in Baltimore, and if I wanted to get a Coca-Cola, that was called soda. However, Voncille...
I was born in West Virginia, and if we wanted to get a Coca-Cola, it was called pop.
Yeah, and that's different. So your dialect is pop.
Tastes the same, but it's different.
So a different dialect.
Yes. Everyone has a primary love language, but rarely does a couple have the same one.
That's so true. That's so true. And a person tends to express love to their spouse based on their own love language, not on their spouses, but how they prefer to be loved.
Speaking your spouse's love language builds marital intimacy and is like making a large unexpected deposit in their love account.
And that can be really pay a lot of dividends, definitely.
I like dividends.
It's not what you say, but the language that you use. When you speak your spouse's love language, love will be more meaningful to them. They will feel more accepted, more valued, more appreciated, and most importantly, more loved.
Yes. Another benefit is there will usually be less conflict and fewer misunderstandings with your spouse.
Yes, you have better understanding and you'll communicate better. So keep learning how to speak your spouse's love language. Speak it consistently and don't give up trying.
Observe how your spouse expresses love to you and what they say you should do to express love to them.
And that's really important, Voncille, because if we're speaking different languages and have different love languages, I need to become a student
Yes.
of yours.
For
I should really focus on how I should express love and how you express love to me.
for example, if my love language is personal touch and I'm always touching you and leaning on you, then you know that's my love language, correct?
Yes, and physical touch is her love language, and we'll be talking about that more in episodes
I
coming.
just wanted from you the physical touch, baby, just to be clear.
Ways to speak your spouse's love language is limitless, but it depends on your commitment and your imagination. You can even pray and ask God for help, because in James 1:5 it says, if any of you lack wisdom, let him ask of God,
Yes.
and he will give that wisdom to you abundantly and not find fault. So it's up to you, husband. It's up to you, wife, to be committed to loving your wife, your husband, according to their love language.
And don't focus on your love language and tell your spouse what they should do to speak better. Instead, focus on learning to speak your spouse's love language.
Good point. Good point. Focus on your love language. Don't focus just on what you want, basically,
Yes.
but focus on what your spouse wants. And that's so important, Voncille.
Yes.
And that helps to overcome selfishness as well. Because a lot of times in marriage, that's a big problem is I'm selfish. I want you to please me.
Right.
Me please you? No. Oh, I will please you if you please me.
And I will.
See, that's selfishness, okay? But we are to focus on pleasing our spouse.
It's a win-win situation, right?
That's right. And it's not a win-lose situation.
Right.
That's a good point. We're trying to get to a win-win. Because in a win-win, we
so
both.
much more fun.
Yes. So remember, the goal is to learn how to love your wife, love your husband in a way they prefer. And you're not to use this tool to manipulate them to get what you want.
Right. And don't be competitive and keep track of how many times you speak your spouse's love language versus how many times they speak yours.
That's right, Voncille.
It's not a competition.
It's not a competition, and we're not to be keeping records or keeping track of that. Well, we are to just freely speak your spouse's love language. Also, don't get angry and criticize your spouse if you feel they're not trying enough to learn and speak your love language. Again, that's another important point.
Yes.
Anger and being critical does not accomplish much in marriage. We have to learn to be patient, be loving, and use a different approach. Instead of being critical,
and it's important to be patient with yourself too, because it does take some time. But compliment your spouse when you see they're doing things differently to try and speak your love language.
Yeah.
Be sure to compliment them on that.
Definitely. Yes, you can get more flies with honey. Definitely.
And not bees.
Right. You'll get stung.
Yes.
All right. The 5 love languages won't fix all marital problems, but it is a useful tool that can help you better communicate with your spouse and also better understand, especially understanding what love means to them and how you can show them love to make it more personal and effective with them.
And compliment your spouse when you see they are doing things differently and try to speak your love language.
Yeah,
And,
that is so good.
if I may add, and we usually communicate with each other according to our love language. For
That's right.
example, if my love language is physical
Touch.
touch,
Mm-hmm.
then I'm forever holding on to this good-looking man because that is my primary love language.
In fact, when we were dating and really hadn't gone to a seminar to learn this, I'll tell you what happened. I was driving the car, and next thing I know, Voncille's reaching across the front seat and touching my leg. And what did I do?
My hand away.
Ooh, I moved her hand away.
Yes. And without realizing, I didn't know that I was communicating through my love language because I wasn't even aware of love languages at that time when we first started dating.
Right.
But so pay attention also to your spouse.
Mm-hmm.
If his love language is
words of affirmation,
or acts of service, pay attention to your spouse. They will tell you how they want to be loved by how they interact with you.
That's right. In fact, they may even accuse you of not loving them. And what they may be saying is you're not loving me the way I prefer or want to be loved. Of course, then the question is, well, how do you want to be loved? Mm-hmm. Okay. And that's where Gary Chapman, in doing his counseling, he would use that approach often. He would ask the wife would tell him, my spouse doesn't love me. And he would ask his spouse, well, how do you want to be loved? And the spouse would give him things that the husband could say or the husband could do, and he would make note of that. Then he would go to the husband and say, the husband would say, I do love my wife, but I don't know how to love her. And so he would pull out his notes and say, your wife said you can show love to her by doing this and by saying this. And after 12 years, he had a lot of notes and many times he was successful because he used that approach. And once he told that husband what his wife wanted, what she preferred, he would use that, start doing that, changing his behavior and what he said and what he did. And Dr. Chapman would have excellent results because of that approach that he used. And so, as we said before, what he decided to do is to write a book. And so in 1992, Chapman wrote a book, The 5 Love Languages, How to Express Heartfelt Commitment to Your Mate. And later he changed the subtitle to The Secret to Love That Lasts. And from that book, we wanted to share how successful it was. And so the book has sold over 20 million copies.
And it has been translated into 49 languages throughout the world. 49 languages.
49 languages. And that's just up to date. It's continually being read and being translated. And that's why we decided to do a series on this because it has really helped us as well.
Yes.
In fact, we also had an opportunity to meet Gary and Carolyn Chapman, and we have a picture here of the four of us. We were attending the Love Like You Mean It marriage group
like you mean it.
in February of 2014 and had an opportunity to not just hear them do a seminar, but to also chat briefly with him.
Personally. And I just want to point out, you may notice the spelling of Carolyn with a K. That is correct. That's how she spells her name, with a K rather than a C. So that's not a typo.
Yes.
Just wanted to point that out.
Yes. So again, we want to encourage you to go to the website, the number 5, lovelanguages.com, and you have different options of the quiz that you can take. We want you to select by answering the question, what type of relationship would you like to strengthen? And select family. Then you can take the free love language quiz and you'll get a report on the results. Print out that report and read the results. Now, throughout our marriage, we have been using the 5 Love Languages book. In fact, we often refer back to it.
Yes.
And one of the things that it has helped us to communicate and share love with each other. And it's also been a good resource to refer back to. And that's what we do.
Yes.
We'll sit down and because as we mentioned earlier, we want you to be a student of your spouse and to learn. And let me also mention, you could go to the 5lovelanguages.com website and sign up to get emails about specific love languages.
It's very useful, very helpful.
Very helpful.
Lots of good
very
information.
Helpful. And as we said before, it's really up to your commitment and your imagination. And so we want to talk briefly about the 5 love languages by Gary Chapman. And the first one is words of affirmation. There's some certain persons that just really excites them, getting compliments. And we're going to talk more about each of the 5 love languages.
Okay. Also, there is quality time. I enjoy spending time with my husband. So if that's his love language, then I want to be sure that I spend more time with him, make an effort to spend more time with him.
And another love language is receiving gifts. And of course, everybody likes to receive gifts, but receiving gifts, the way Gary Chapman describes it, is a little bit different. So as we said, we're going to do a series of 3 shows going into much detail about these different love languages and what you can do to learn to speak it better. A 4th one is
acts of service.
Acts of service.
My husband loves to eat, and so I cook for him, and that's an example of act of service, cooking for my husband because he loves to eat.
Yes, and I can vacuum the floors. That's an act of service for you.
And do the laundry, which I really appreciate.
Well, thank you. Thank you. So we'll talk more about acts of service. And the last one is
physical touch.
Physical touch. And as Voncille mentioned earlier, that's her love language. And there's a lot of ways that I can show her love by speaking her love language of physical touch.
Right. And that doesn't mean that I want everyone touching me. I like it when he touches me. You can touch me 24/7. I love it.
Right. That's a good point. That's a good point. Again, the objective here is to help you to better understand what love means to your spouse.
Yes.
Not how you define it. For example, I could have come up in a home where there was very little physical touching. There was just verbal. And yet your need is physical touch. But then the question becomes, once I learn about this, what am I going to do? Am I willing to change what I say? Am I willing to change what I do to please you?
Yeah, love your spouse according to their love language.
That's
yes,
right.
That's important.
So it's not what I want to have done to me or said to me, but the key is knowing what my wife prefers and being willing to change my behavior to please my wife. And we'll be talking more about
yes,
this.
and may I also say this is not just between a husband and wife, it's parents and their children as well. Children
Yes.
have love languages. And my mother knew what my love language was when I was growing up without even knowing anything about those long before this book came out, of course.
Okay.
But so remember that your children have a special, specific love language as well.
Well, Voncille, let's get started with these 5 love languages. In fact, we'll start with one that's near and dear to my heart, and that's words of affirmation. The person with this love language values, loves compliments. They also love encouragement and kind words that really build or edify. And since that's my love language, when you compliment me, that really turns me on.
I got you hooked.
No, that's so important.
You want to be sincere in what you're saying to your spouse.
Good
That's very
point.
important.
And not be manipulative.
Yes. Yes.
But to a person that words of affirmation is their love language, they cherish compliments. It
Right.
really excites and builds them up. Also,
they need to hear from you in sincerity, words of appreciation, which keeps them from feeling they have been taken for granted.
oh,
So again, I say it's important to be authentic and sincere in giving your spouse compliments if their love language is words of affirmation.
Yes, that is so true. Nobody wants to feel like they're being taken for granted. Yeah, or manipulated. So compliments, complimenting their character, complimenting their work habits, complimenting their commitment as a mother or a father. Really, for someone that love language is words of affirmation, that means a whole lot to them.
For example, I will not say to my husband, "You're a wonderful cook," because he is not.
Yeah.
So that's not authentic. And a person whose love language is words of affirmation, they do not want to be complimented by their spouse to manipulate them to do something.
Yes, as you mentioned before, because especially wives can tell if you're sincere. Yeah, they can pick that up. Their intuition, or they can be very observant. Just like on a job, okay, co-workers or your supervisor can tell if you're insincere and just being manipulative. So words of affirmation, you have to be sincere.
And it's impacted not just by words used by their spouse, but also by the tone of voice.
Yeah, the voice tone can be very, very important. Yes. So, if your spouse's love language is words of affirmation,
when you say, "I love you," explain why. I love you because I love the way you take care of our children. You're a wonderful father. And I love how you cherish me by me.
Yeah, it's not enough to say, "I love you," if that's your spouse's love language. Also, commit to compliment them daily. Or if you're just getting started, be frequent about it. Be committed to do it. Compliment them for what they do, for character traits, fruit of the spirit, or how valuable they are to you. Compliment them.
And commit to compliment your spouse in front of the kids, your family, or friends. That's very important, especially for your children. You don't
Yes.
want to criticize your spouse in front of the children
Right. Or family.
or family or friends,
Mm-hmm.
especially friends.
And also, if your spouse's love language is words of affirmation, one way you can learn is as you watch TV, movies, or listen to music, take note of compliments people are making. As you watch that TV show, watch that movie, just be aware. Again, take notes. You're researching of compliments that people make. And even kids can do that as well.
Right. If not, it may add, you want to be sincere and authentic in what you're saying to your spouse.
Yes.
For if I can say this again, I know I've used this example.
Mhm.
My husband does not know how to cook. So if I say to him, "Oh, you're a great cook," that's a lie because he's not. I mean, he will go out and buy food or take me to dinner, which I appreciate. But be sincere because they will know
Yes.
if you're not.
And if words of affirmation is your spouse's love language, occasionally give a written compliment. Send a text.
Right.
So they could be at work and you send them a text. Hey, you made a great dinner last night. I still can taste it. Thank you very much. I really appreciate the effort you made to do that. Or maybe they made a cake or something. Whatever it is,
Or
it's just a brief written compliment.
yeah, one thing I used to do when my husband worked and I had retired, I would make his lunch for him. And on occasion, I would put a love note in his lunch
Yes.
bucket for him. So you can do that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you.
You're
And
welcome.
I appreciated everyone, both the lunch and the note. The note was like dessert. Observe what your spouse says, does, the sacrifices they make, and how they make your life better. And keep a list on your phone. You
Yes.
could put things on your cell phone.
Yes.
Maybe you're just sitting and they do something for you. Just make a note of it,
Yes.
so that you can speak that word of affirmation.
Underestimate how important it is. So be specific when complimenting and talk up your spouse to your kids, your family members, your spouse's friends, and your friends.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
Yes.
Apologize to clear the air after an argument.
And I love the way you've taught me how to do that.
Well, thank you.
You're
Thank
welcome,
you.
darling.
But words of affirmation, if that's your spouse's love language, they really need to hear from you to apologize.
Yes.
Okay. And I mentioned about sending text messages or notes. And here's a big one as well.
Compliment for doing something routinely. If I may say, every morning, what my husband does for me that I really appreciate, he will bring me coffee and breakfast up to bed. I really appreciate that.
Well, thank you. Thank you. We're retired. So.
Yeah, we're retired. But I appreciate that.
And also, if this is your spouse's love language, words of affirmation, be aware that your spouse is sensitive to criticism. Words hurt them more. They can easily interpret that as, I'm losing your love, or you don't love me. If that becomes a critical habit, then because that's their love language, words of affirmation, they really hurt by that.
Right.
So it's just something to be aware of. So those are what we're talking about, words of affirmation. And we hope once you take the quiz and find out if your spouse's love language is words of affirmation, that you will apply some of these tips to show and love them the way they prefer to be loved.
And there are fringe benefits to it, if I may say. But you want to be sincere about it.
Yes.
So before we close, we want to encourage you to write us at livingagodlymarriage@gmail.com. That's livingagodlymarriage@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you.
And as we always love to close our show, living a godly marriage is the best marriage.
God bless and have a wonderful day.
See you next time.